Hi, my name is Sydney Wolf, and for my sophomore project, I chose to learn how to throw pottery on the wheel. I was inspired to do this project because I love pottery and had taken classes on hand building before, though I had never tried wheel pottery. I had seen videos of others doing wheel pottery and thought it was a fun challenge to attempt. Throughout learning how to throw, I had many learning experiences, from learning how to center my clay so it didn't wobble and fall off, to learning how to make taller and wider pieces of pottery. Since I have taken this risk and started this project, I have spent many hours perfecting my craft. To begin this project, I needed to have access to clay, pottery wheels, and tools. To fit that requirement, I began taking ceramics classes at school and attending a teen wheel class each Friday from 4 to 6:30 p.m. through Southridge Recreation Center. While classes through Southridge and school did cost money, the instruction and learning that I received were well worth it. While learning a hands-on craft, the only way that you can learn is by spending time and putting effort into the craft. My timeline was from November 8th of 2024 to January 21st of 2025. During this time, I went to pottery classes at Southridge and school. When I first began, I thought that it would be easy enough since I had seen people doing things like this before. But when you're doing it yourself, you'll find that it is much more challenging. At first, I was unable to throw even pieces because I had a tough time centering my piece. To center, you must press your elbows into your side to stabilize and use that pressure to move the clay to the exact center of the wheel to get an even piece. My inability to do that led to pieces that looked like this. However, as I kept working, I was able to get even walls on small pieces and eventually bigger ones. That was the first major hurdle I had to overcome. The next challenge I had to overcome was learning to quit while I was ahead. When you sit down at the wheel, you usually have a vision of what you want to make, but something I've come to learn is that the clay is in control and it might not always do what you want it to. You tend to learn this pretty quick because if you work on a piece for too long, then it will get too wet, unstabilized, and flop over. My final in ceramics class was actually created from one of these pieces that had begun to flop but had not collapsed completely. By using both of these challenges to learn, I was able to achieve my final goal of my sophomore project, which was to create a statement piece. To do this, I had to throw two of the biggest pieces I have ever thrown. First, I drafted what I wanted to look like and found the weight of the clay I would need, which turned out to be 4 pounds for the dragon and 7 pounds for the bowl. At first, I threw an open bottom piece, which widened as it opened, for the base of the dragon. Then I threw a foot-wide bowl. After that, I let it dry for about an hour, and I began to work on adding to the dragon's base. While it was drying, I made a pinch pot for the head, which is a piece of clay that is split in half, hollowed, and then reconnected to make a sphere. And after that, I added arms, legs, eyes, and a nose holes, as well as cutting open the mouth and propping it open to let it dry. After that, I added ears, a tail, teeth, spikes, and horns, and ears. Then I went in the next day and created wings and a treasure chest, which later ended up falling off. I tested the size of the dragon in the bowl and decided it was perfect. A week later, I added texture to my dragon, but ended up bumping into one of the wings and it fell off. Then I spent the next 30-ish minutes retashing it, but by the end of the day, it was ready to go in the kiln. Once it was out of the kiln, I spent 2 hours glazing it and then put it in for the glaze fire. After that glaze fire, the ceramics part of the project was done, but because I wanted an even better final, I decided to make it a working fountain. That was a challenge since I couldn't get the pump to work and spent hours trying to get the pump to work with the piece. But in the end, I did get the piece working as a complete fountain. So, we sophomores are asked to create criteria to compare our success to. The 5 criteria I had to meet were function, aesthetic, safety, size, and quality or durability. I chose these aspects as criteria because they allowed me not to only assess my ability, but assess the ability of my product too. For my final project, I had 5 criteria points I had to meet, which were stated earlier, and I will be saying if I met or exceeded these expectations. I ended up meeting my expectations for function since the pieces did not break in the kiln and were able to be made into a fountain. I thought that the aesthetic was pleasing and very successful as a whole for this piece. For the safety portion, I exceeded expectations since I expected to end up with at least 1 injury since I'm pretty clumsy, but I managed to finish the final project without injury. For the size of the project, I threw 2 of my biggest pieces ever at 4 and 7 pounds of clay, resulting in a total of 11 pounds, which exceeded my expectations. The quality and durability of my piece once again exceeded my expectations since I thought it would maybe crack or not work, but I was able to figure it out to where it didn't break and worked as a successful fountain. While I did meet my criteria, the piece still had strengths and weaknesses. The biggest strength of the piece was that I was able to throw 7 pounds needed to create the bowl that the dragon sits in. My biggest weakness was that the dragon was hard to throw since it had an open bottom, and when hooking up the fountain inside the head, it was hard to fit the tube through. But I was able to use my TR skills through creative thinking to help me solve this. The first example of creative thinking was the different ways that I used my thrown pieces so that I didn't just have a bunch of cylinders. I made mugs, bowls, and planters from my pieces while I was learning for my final project, which shows creative thinking because I made the items into something else so that they could have a different use. The second example is my sketch for my final project, which shows how I thought out what I needed to make my final product work. My final project, there was a lot of creative thinking going into it, so I could figure out the logistics and things that either worked or didn't for this project. I made 2 different base bowls so I could see how wide it had to be and how tall the base should be, which shows creative thinking. I have developed as a learner because I am now able to problem solve, learn creatively, and have the resilience to restart after failure. I will take these skills into my future learning, which will allow me to be a stronger student, which I suppose is the main goal of the Sophomore Project. So, if I go into my future as a stronger student, then I will have succeeded not only in my goal, but as the Sophomore Project as a whole.